So let's start out off with a very blunt question about Ksenia Sobchak's presidential campaign that I think a lot of people are wondering, is this for real, or is this some kind of a ploy maybe by the Kremlin to make the elections look more democratic and more interesting? What do you think?
Well, I think the answer to that is it depends whose point of view you're looking from. For Ksenia Sobchak, I think these elections are very real. I had the opportunity of speaking to both Ksenia and Alexei Navalny in the last couple of days, and they have two very different points of view. My gut feeling is that this is something that actually did come from Ksenia. I've no doubt that it was at the very least approved by the presidential administration and the Kremlin. There are reasons for the Kremlin to support such a bid. But I think that Ksenia, knowing her character and the way she looks at life, I have a feeling that this is something that she believes in. The campaign itself is a fairly strange one by Western standards. Ksenia herself says she's not trying to get the presidency. She doesn't see that's a possibility for at least the next 6 years. But she says that this is an opportunity for her to put her foot in the door and present an opportunity for Putin, and the emphasis is on Putin, to change the system. So hers is very much an up-down election campaign rather than Navalny, which is concentrated on the masses. But she thinks that this is the only thing that she can do. The best opportunity for democratic politics in Russia. Now, of course, Navalny has a completely different view. He's biting his tongue. He did his very best to not talk about Sobchak, saying that's exactly what the Kremlin wants him to do. And of course, the difference in the way that the Kremlin have approached both campaigns couldn't be starker. Look at Navalny. He spent every fifth day in prison since declaring his presidential ambitions rather ambitiously last December. Whereas Ksenia Sobchak this last week has appeared on federal TV, and your regular listeners will know just how regulated that sector is. You don't appear on federal TV without the say-so of Konstantin Ernst, who will have got the go-ahead from the presidential administration. So that this campaign has been approved from the powers that be is without question. The issue, I suppose, for the opposition is to understand exactly whose initiative it was, whether this was something that came from Ksenia Sobchak. I'm minded to believe that, knowing her, the way she views life, and she obviously sees this is the ultimate challenge for her. She's someone who's a very proud woman. In many ways, she's a very impressive woman. But I think what the opposition is saying, she might be an excellent journalist, she might be a role model for women, but is she really our best presidential hope? Many of them will say no. So it is in many ways a present for the Kremlin. But I don't think we have enough evidence to say this is 100% a Kremlin project.
How would you describe Ksenia Sobchak's political platform?
It's a very elite liberal. One may even say quite out of touch with the popular mood in Moscow, in Russia. I mean, her campaign manager said it all when he was unveiled only 30 minutes into the press conference, and he said, Ksenia has this idea of going for the individualistic vote as opposed to Navalny, who's the mass vote, which is why he says that Ksenia could not be giving over shouldn't give up her candidacy if Navalny is elected. And he basically said that it's an interesting idea. It's been tried before, it's failed, but we're going to try it again. So in that, she has a very, Navalny calls it a cannibalistic approach to economics. She told me about her hero, which I'm not going to go into. I'll leave for my reportage to be coming out next week. But for her, these are she's a free marketeer. She's definitely for trickle down theory, and I think again that also comes into the Kremlin's thinking, because if you have somebody in a country where a lot of people are dependent on social government, or the so-called budjetniki, the people who rely on state subsidy in some way or another, whether it's a sort of army sector or a one industry town which is heavily reliant on a subsidized industry. Well, she doesn't have much for them, and that was the real danger of Navalny. He was actually getting some traction in those areas. I think the idea of Sobchak, the typical, Russian man in the provinces or woman, that I don't think is going to think that Sobchak is their champion. So, the two, though they are on the protest wing of the spectrum, the two are very different in terms of their outlook to very basic social issues.
One of the things that has surprised and interested many here in Ukraine is that Ksenia Sobchak said that according to international law, Crimea is still Ukrainian. Why do you think she said that, and do you think that she's afraid of facing criminal charges for that?
My understanding from a few sources is this is actually Ksenia's own personal decision, and she went against the advice of several of her advisors. And I think she knew about the possibilities, and I think that it was a deliberate decision to make news, to make some distinction from her position and Navalny's position. But what's interesting is that in actual fact, since then, her position is becoming quite similar to Navalny's. Navalny's initially refused to commit to the idea of returning Crimea to Ukraine, and then embraced an idea of a policy of basically making the Crimean question Crimean. So redoing the referendum in neutral circumstances, free media, and then deciding, letting the Crimeans decide for themselves. Now, Ksenia, at her first press conference, said, from the point of view of international law, Crimea is Ukrainian, punto. And then let's have a conversation. Now, that changed in Yekaterinburg yesterday. She said, again, she embraced the idea of a referendum. She embraced the idea of Crimea being Crimean. And there was sort of some sort of, it was making the position clearer and more exact, but there was a slight walking back of that position. I think she has certainly put herself at a certain risk here, because although it's unlikely that the Kremlin will move now, and Peskov, Putin's spokesman, has already said that he doesn't. These were sort of silly remarks, but he hasn't criticised them, hasn't condoned them, hasn't talked about a criminal case coming afterwards. But she still has that hanging over, and there's no time limit to when a case might be brought against her for separatism. So, in many ways, she has exposed herself to a certain risk there. But it looks as if it was Ksenia's decision, which, in Russian reality at the moment, certainly is a very unusual, shall we say, position.
Ksenia Sobchak has also said that she won't insult President Vladimir Putin because of his close ties with her father, Anatoly Sobchak, the first democratically elected mayor of St. Petersburg. What do you make of that?
Well, again, it sets her apart from Navalny. She has presented herself as the peaceful transition candidate, rather than Navalny being the revolutionary candidate. And again, just to re-emphasize, she believes that the best hope for liberal Russia will come from Putin himself, not from Navalny, and not from pressure being put on him, because in her opinion, that would be counterproductive. Now, these positions can be argued out in Russian opposition circles, but in her opinion, nothing will be gained by insulting Putin. Navalny says that's absurd. I'm not going to stop criticizing Putin, and he says I'm certainly not making a distinction between Putin the person and Putin the political animal. Putin is the guy who's put my brother in prison. So for Navalny, hearing that from Sobchak made him more sure in his belief that there is more to meet Sobchak's campaign there's more to Sobchak's campaign than meets the eye. But he wouldn't say that, of course. He was very, 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 very careful not to enter into any polemics with Sobchak, because, as I say, he thinks that's exactly where the Kremlin wants him to be heading.